Discussions of immersion often rely on vague or metaphorical language. Expressions such as being transported into another world or feeling present in simulation are common. But what really happens when you lost yourself in a video game? It is just focused attention or a special mode of consciousness? In this video, we explore how our minds structure perception, emotion, and self-awareness during gameplay. What if being immersed means somehow being unconscious?
Super hot, super hot, super hot, super.
First of all, there is a difference between state consciousness and creature consciousness, a foundational one. A creature is conscious if the organism as a whole is awake or capable of awareness. This is also the common sense meaning of consciousness. That way, the patient regained consciousness refers to the subject being in a general condition that allows mental activity. But why is that not enough? Why this ordinary conception of consciousness clearly tells us whether a person is awake at the time, it says nothing about why some experiences are conscious, why others are not in the same time, and how introspection and reflection arise. Therefore, a person might be awake and alert, but not conscious some of his mental states like sensations, thoughts, or emotions at the same time. Maybe he experiences something he himself does not understand or feel properly. Like when we arrive at the finish line without knowing or remembering the path. Perhaps we have wandered in our thoughts, but for most of the race, the perception of obstacles or competitors was not fully conscious. They were not in our focus. So, can we play a game unconsciously? The psychological concept of flow, developed by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, raises challenges for theories of consciousness because it involves highly absurd activity that seems to involve less introspection and loss of self-consciousness. What is flow? Focused attention on a task, merging of action and awareness, loss of self-consciousness, distortion of time perception, intrinsic reward in the activity itself. It often occurs during gaming. One is completely absorbed in an activity for its own sake. The ego falls away, time flies. Every action, movement, and thought follows inevitably from the previous one. Is flow unconscious? This is where things get interesting, because flow involves the very rich perception of the external environment. This first-order perception is about the game we play, not about our mental states or thoughts. The most we can say is the enemy is here, or the bullet must go there. Therefore, flow also comes with reduced introspective awareness. You're not reflecting, I'm really doing this, or how do I look during this, or am I doing this right? You are not thinking, I'm now hitting the enemy. You are just doing it. So, it is not totally unconscious. But it is also not an introspective state. That way, consciousness is not necessarily built into immersive flow perception. In that case, consciousness arises only when there is a higher order thought. The so-called hut is about a rich first-order perception. But what does it mean in relation to the flow? Higher-order introspective thoughts are minimized, backgrounded, or non-conscious during the flow state. There is a little or no introspective awareness of own sensation, thoughts, or emotions at the time. My consciousness cannot be focused outside of me and inwardly at the same time. And flow is a paradigm of pure outer-directed focus. Such examples of less conscious flow are also examples of immersion. And we can experience flow-like immersion in many ways. Representational immersion, the simulation of perception. This is the most common idea people have about immersion. How realistic and believable the virtual environment seems. It's about how well the system tricks our senses into experiencing a virtual space as real. Also, this form of immersion is most closely aligned with what is called presence, the feeling of being there. But this kind of immersion includes not only perception, such as colors, shapes and sounds, but also some cognition about spatial relations or causal consequences. For example, the player acquires various kinds of information about the virtual world she's in. That the location where she's standing is a specific room in a virtual space, that there is a lots of enemies hiding in the building she sees from her vantage point, and that these enemies will try to find her through specific points of access. Again, this isn't just about fooling the senses. It also involves cognition about the realistic environment. In the case of the game Superhot, the first order state or our first reaction is a painful emotion directed at the usual game visuals, like frustration, anxiety, boredom. But the introspective higher order thought directed at this state still evaluates it positively. I am aware that I feel bored for a lack of visual stimulation in this new environment, and this fact helps me focus on learning new game mechanics. Participatory immersion, interactivity. Whereas representational immersion is about what you perceive, participatory immersion is about who are you and what can you do. Probably someone who acts, moves and alters the course of events within a simulated world. This dimension is related to interactivity. The subject's ability to choose a visual perspective, shift bodily orientation, or explore a space contributes to the sense of inhabiting and navigating a world. Games expand this agency, allowing users to affect not just perspective, but also the environment and narrative structure. Books and films offer little participatory immersion. They are mostly passive. In the case of Superhot, the first order state or our first reaction is a painful emotion directed at the usual game mechanics, like frustration, anxiety, boredom. But the introspective higher order thought directed at this state still evaluates it positively. I am aware that I feel frustrated for my lack of skill in this new environment, and this fact challenges my learning ability. The third dimension, affective immersion, involves the gamer's emotional engagement with the virtual environment. Emotions are not merely byproducts of immersion, they are constitutive of it. The virtual experience becomes immersive to the extent that it elicits affective responses that mirror those evoked by analogous real-world scenarios. What matters is that the subject phenomenal consciousness is not limited to perception or interactivity, but includes empathy. A game may be high in perceptual and participatory immersion, but low in affective immersion if it fails to engage the user emotionally. Conversely, narrative-oriented games might induce intense emotions even with minimal interactivity or graphic realism. Narrative immersion captures the sense of being caught up in a coherent, temporally unfolding story. While a slideshow of travel photos may offer visual information, it often lacks temporal flow or narrative logic. A well-crafted virtual experience, by contrast, can render even simple scenarios narratively immersive by integrating character, setting, and causality into a temporal arc. This draws on our innate narrative cognition, the tendency to interpret events as part of meaningful wholes with beginnings, middles, and ends. Narrative immersion is key to empathy and memory. We remember stories better than facts. That's why games and films with stories stick with us. In opposition to these immersive examples, higher-order thoughts are mental states that are about other mental states, like thinking I'm seeing an enemy through walls, or even reflecting how should I deal with him properly. We most often encounter these thoughts in situations where our tried and tested methods no longer work, or something intentionally interrupts our gameplay. Typical examples are minigames that pulls us out of immersion and flow, or scenes that intentionally cross the line of good taste. When a higher order thought itself becomes conscious, when we not only enjoy the gameplay but become reflectively aware of what causes our joy, why, and whether it is good. Then we have introspective consciousness. The self becomes a structure of awareness, where mental states are tugged with the mark of mind by higher order thoughts. However, during most immersive aesthetic experiences, our conscious attention remains outwardly directed, caught up in the flow of the fiction. But if we are not fully conscious during gameplay, what are we experiencing? The qualia. What happens in immersive gameplay is that we have the qualia of freedom. We feel that we can control of our environment. Qualia are the subjective experiences of sensory perceptions. This is also what the AI is thinking when it tries to distinguish itself from us. And this is one of the reasons why we cannot give him human rights. But you can also imagine an undercover cop named Wei Shen. He's a genius in cop stuff, but he lived his whole life in a black and white room. He never seen color himself. No red, no blue. But he knows everything about color from physics, biology, and neuroscience. Now, here's the twist. One day, he leaves the room and sees red for the first time. The question? Did he learn something new? If you say yes, that he learned what it is like to see red. What it's like to actually feel or see a color. The same applies to freedom, which sometimes can only be truly experienced in the states of less conscious gameplay immersion.